Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast with Lisa Fine and Mary Shirley. Today you've got the two of us. We're doing a joint episode and we celebrate our GWICies, which you may be familiar with our 100th episode last year, as well as Compliance Week Highlights, which is an annual conference that Lisa and I attended, and we've attended in previous years as well. So we'll be doing a little bit of comparing, contrasting, and speaking about some of the things that stood out to us and some of the things that we learned. We're going to start off today, though, with the GWICies, which are very informal. Please don't put in any challenges to our GWICies. These are just Lisa and I playing around, but also looking to recognize great things that are happening in the field. So we'll kick it off, and I think Lisa and I will go alternatively as per usual. So my first one is for Best New Idea. The GWICie goes to the 7 Elements Book Club, which was founded and set up by Kate Toby and Alan Hunt, who are GWIC and friends of the podcast. They've decided to put together a regular book club which discusses compliance books and invites the authors of those books to attend a session where the audience can ask questions, and there are also breakout opportunities so that you can do some networking as well. And Lisa and I attended one where Sending the Elevator Back Down was featured recently, and we had a great time, including meeting new people. So fantastic idea. Lisa, over to you.
Okay. Well, I am just going to mention for my GWICie sort of the best new code. And I think anyone who has listened to Mary or me recently knows that we are huge fans of the SNAP Code of Conduct. What I really like about it, and what I think we can all learn from or have learned from, and they've done it so well, is they've tied it to their values, they've tied it to their mission, and they specifically keep coming back to being kind. And we've both had guests on the podcast who've talked about it from SNAP, and they really have done a really good job of making this something that is engaging. It shows what the organization is, what the company is like, and also lives up to their values, and makes it interactive in a way that, and just pretty in a way that I just think they did a great job. That I talk about the code of conduct of SNAP so much, you'd think I either worked sometimes for SNAP or with SNAP or for whoever helped them with it. So I think they deserve some recognition for doing that well.
Great. Good one. And my next one is for Best Swag at the Compliance Week conference. That goes to Compliance Line. What they did was, instead of useless crap that you would probably never use or want to put in the trash, which is incredibly wasteful, I would say, they decided to support what was predominantly women authors in compliance and buy a boatload of compliance books, and you could go to their booth and choose a book to take home with you. So that definitely beat a stress ball, in my opinion. And so well done, Compliance Line. Great idea.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little point to that, Mary.
Please.
Because not only did they have the best swag, they had a wonderful no pitch zone. And in fact, Tom Fox, who many of you know, and also is our podcast producer, we're very fortunate for that, asked if I had moved in there at one point. Because I'd leave my bag, I would drop by. So it wasn't it's a place to be at a conference. Yeah. A sentence I never thought I'd necessarily say, but I want to thank the Yellow Brothers for that, as well as their support of compliance authors, and particularly female compliance officers. So with that, I'm going to turn to another man who is a a friend of the podcast, and that's the best weekly read. Adam Balfour has started this column on LinkedIn, which now is going to be weekly on Corporate Compliance Insights, I saw. Adam Balfour at Bridgestone, he has done an amazing job of coming up with different thoughts, engaging thoughts, different things about both how to be a good compliance officer, to programs, to policies. And it just really is something that I think has taken off in a life of its own, which is something that he just started doing on Sunday afternoons. So I think that he should be getting the GWICie for that best weekly read. And Adam, one of the other awards you're getting that you didn't know about until now is hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you a little bit as one of the men who really has supported us in compliance and women generally. So thank you to Adam.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lisa. And Best New Compliance Podcast GWICie goes to Gwen Hassan for her podcast Hidden Traffic, which talks a lot about modern day slavery and some of the risks that are happening there. So well done, Gwen. Appreciate you.
Well, I think I'm going to follow that up with another best outside compliance success. And the reason I'm following you with that is that it's also a Gwen. So Gwen Romack, thank you. You've done a fantastic job on your books with the Fin Chronicles and really, incorporating even your outside consulting with your passion with off-leash consulting really has taken the dog world and your books are just fantastic. So best outside compliance success, Gwen. Here's to you.
Nice. Cheers, Gwen. And the next award, which is reminiscent of one that I gave last year, which was Best Opportunity to Turn a Negative into a Positive. And I've renamed it for this time around the Phoenix Rising GWICie, which is to reference the fact that the vast majority of best-in-class compliance programs have really risen from the ashes of compliance disasters. I'd like to give this one to Activision Blizzard. And interestingly, Lisa prepared a very similar one. So we're going to do this in conjunction with each other. Activision Blizzard has been canvassed multiple times at this conference and in compliance. I've just renamed our podcast to conference. Although it was actually mentioned at the conference, interestingly, and a panelist who is more familiar with Activision Blizzard's compliance function commented that they've actually done a lot of work to try and move themselves forward, including hiring external advisors to assist them. But unfortunately, Activision Blizzard made the news again within the last week with regards to the lactation rooms in the office not being a safe area and including the fact that breast milk has been stolen. So still some work, it appears, from a culture perspective there, but really looking at this from in an asset-based way, this is a chance for Activision Blizzard to be a phoenix rising and really turning that culture around and having something awesome to show for it in due course. Lisa, what did you have on this one?
Well, I think mine was a little less optimistic and aspirational than yours because while I still think that everything you say is accurate and I think that Activision Blizzard is working towards that, it really is in some ways almost what I would think of as a dubious achievement award because even with what you just said a minute ago with the lactation rooms, it is a gift that keeps on giving for compliance programs as examples of things that can go wrong, starting from the very beginning, which we've talked about a lot of times, either on this podcast or in other contexts, where the chief compliance officer decided to kind of minimize some of the concerns as past concerns, at which point employees decided to correct that interpretation of things or give their view on it. From both the culture standpoint to the compliance standpoint, the programmatic one. I think those are a couple of them that would be kept into my mind.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when I put the latest update into a group chat to reference your comment about the gift that keeps on giving, I think I captioned it with, just when you think it couldn't get any worse. It just seems like every few months there's something else.
And Mary, I forgot to mention to you one of the other awards that I wanted to give. So I'm going to give it out now and hopefully.
Oh, surprise.
Well, it's a surprise. I think that the worst real-time example of tone at the top, which all of us saw this year, was at the Academy Awards with the slap. I feel like
that's a great. Oh, yeah, that's totally appropriate.
I'm not sure who at the Academy will want to say I will be accepting this award on their behalf. But in any event, I really thought. I mean, your opinions on the whole situation aside, the idea that as this whole thing was playing out, the participants, one of them was not leaving the building and in fact accepted award a few minutes later, and the damage control was all done later, was such the example to me of when an organization doesn't handle appropriately initially somebody who's a senior person who's kind of the big deal. It's the idea, do people get treated differently? I mean, there are a lot of other components to that situation, but I think from an organizational standpoint and a tone from the top standpoint, we watched a real-time example of, when those things, don't go well. If some other person rushed the stage, for example, what would have happened without revisiting the entire situation? Some of this, I think is a real lesson to looking at what leadership and what, the important, people that are high profile in an organization do and how it's handled.
Lisa, I wasn't going to give this one as an actual GWICie, but it's reminded me, what you're saying is almost like a best move GWICie could be given to the sports teams who decided to focus on gun violence in the US after the horrific shootings that we've seen recently. It would be very easy, I would say, for people in the sporting and athletic arena to say, well, that's not our business. Let's focus on the sporting side of things. And yet they actually have tremendous influence over the culture of a country. In New Zealand, for example, when the All Blacks, which is our rugby team, when they lose, instances of domestic violence spike horrendously in the country. So there is a huge influence that our sportsmen and women have over the residents of a country. And I thought it was an awesome show of priority that they decided to focus on something that is clearly a problem. And I'm not going to pontificate on it. I'm not the right person. And also, I think Jacinda Ardern spoke on behalf of Team New Zealand while she was visiting for the Harvard commencement speech last week. But I did think that was, the flip side of what you were mentioning. We can see awful examples of tone from the top, and we can also see people using their influence for good. And it may not necessarily be their job to do so. We may not expect it, but in fact, it turned out to be the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we brought that in. And for one other point on that, before we go back, if anybody wants to listen to probably, I think one of the best sports leaders talking about that is the coach of the U.S. basketball team, the Golden State Warriors, Steve Kerr, going out before their game and said, "We're going to talk about this instead." And I think that was a good example of that. So, American entertainment and sports, no lack of examples. So, I think, is this up to my last award then?
Yep.
Okay. So this is an important award because this is our only repeat. And this person, I just want to I'm putting it back out there because I think it's an important award for somebody to try to, claim this title, which is the comic relief, while still being a substantive individual, but the funniest and most, the best humor in compliance. The GWIC goes for the second year to Jonathan Armstrong. So the reason why I want to make sure is because, even the way he accepted this award and when he asked, whether or not we would last year, whether he'd be able to keep something at home or did he need to sort of, rent out one of, somewhere in Mayfair in London to demonstrate, to put it out there. I would like to see somebody, knock him off next year. And, Jonathan, please keep raising the bar higher because, even with all the things we've talked about right now, there's a lot of serious in this world and there's a lot of serious in our jobs. And to bring a sense of humor into it, I think makes it a little bit better for all of us and makes us better professionals by doing that. But more than that, it just makes it a bit of fun. So I'm hoping next year we've got a new winner, but Jonathan, keep up the good work.
Nice one. And hello to Jonathan, one of our dearest friends. That brings us to the Compliance Week highlights. So what did Lisa and I learn, or what did we find interesting from the conference? Lisa, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think one of the first things for me, it was not so much a learning as much as what it reminds me is you don't remember how much you miss in-person experiences. That we did have one at SCCE, but the second one, when it was sort of a slightly different COVID phase, really, it was just so nice to be part of this community, and to see people that I haven't seen in a long time. And whether it was to connect personally through different events, or getting to see them in person, or socializing, or just listening to the speakers that I haven't gotten to hear in a while, and really focus in that way, I think there's really no comparison. It reminds you how much energy you get from being a part of the community and with one another sometimes. So I think that was one of the major takeaways for me, is that how much I continue to value these experiences.
Lovely. And totally agree. For me, the first one that I wanted to mention was Kenneth Polite Jr., who is the Assistant Attorney General. He did a plenary session, and he foreshadowed the chief compliance officers would be expected to sign off at the end of monitorships. And then interestingly, the week after, the Glencore settlement came out. And I'll just give a quick shout out, but not a GWICie, to our friends at Radical Compliance. They did an excellent write-up on the Glencore case, if you want to get caught up with that, including the fact that they've got 2 monitors. Take a look. And so I thought it was really cool to see, almost in real time, a DOJ representative talking about this requirement that I don't think we've seen before. And then the next case to come out was like a week later, the Glencore settlement, and their settlement does include the CCO sign-off. So cheers to Radical Compliance, and great selection of speaker by Compliance Week. I think that was one of the most popular sessions. Lisa?
It's interesting, because I also was going to talk a bit about that conversation and Kenneth Polite discussion too. And I was surprised. There was a lot that I really was interested in, and in terms of them talking about what they were doing, their understanding. But I also was going to talk about the certification requirement, but in a slightly different context. And I understand that Fresenius does have a monitorship. So this is totally the Lisa Fine view on this, and a concern, and that I've been thinking about, is that if you have a situation, whether it's a monitor or another thing, or you're asking for a chief compliance officer sign off, I think it's good, because from an accountability standpoint, I'm not exactly sure. I think that it should be the CCO rather than the CEO, or one of the, the highest executive leader, for a couple of reasons. One, oftentimes between when the problem arose and the time that a monitorship, or the time that a settlement or anything else is finished, you may have a change. So a CCO may be signing off on things that may not entirely be theirs. They also can't control the business members of the organization in the same way. So they can sign off. And, there are often times that things may not go as smoothly within other parts. I think it's important that all of an organization owns a compliance failure, because it isn't just the compliance team's failure most often. Right. It's a controls failure. So I thought it was interesting to talk about. I had been, right when that settlement came out, I've been thinking a lot of, is this good or is this bad? And I see both sides of it. So when you're talking about, that was something that made me think. On the other hand, I think it's good that somebody has to sign off. Somebody has to have ownership. But I also get worried about how the chief ethics and compliance officers and ethics and compliance teams already have to own so many things, that other people's behaviors, you need others to support. So that's just a Lisa Fine take on that. I would love to talk about it more with people as we all keep thinking about it. So I will just say, on another thing that I thought was a really positive, interesting speaker to me, was John Carreyrou talking about bad blood and Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. I read the book before I listened to a podcast, before anything. So for me, this is also like a little bit of a fangirl kind of moment, listening to him talk. I mean, a lot of the stuff we've heard about multiple times at this point, but something about listening to him and listening to Mary Inman, who represented some of the whistleblowers and was your guest on the podcast, that kind of talk about it from those viewpoints. I just thought it was a really unique and interesting, substantive conversation about what happened, and who was speaking out, and particularly the chemist who spoke out. I think it was a chemist early on, and didn't quite get the same level of attention or as some of the others, but it just the courage of everyday people and the way that he highlighted that, I just really kind of reminds me a lot of, the importance of what we do and trying to do the right thing.
Excellent. Good. The next one that I've got is in relation to the company Ryder. They had a success story which was told by Pilar Caballero, the Chief Compliance Officer, and it was about undeclared dual employment conflicts of interest risks. And I'm not going to spoil that for you, as Pilar has very kindly agreed to be on GWIC to canvass that story shortly. But Lisa, if I'm not mistaken, you have a fun story about dual employment risk to share.
I do. This did not come from Compliance Week, but I did share it at some point. I had, in a former role, I got a message through the hotline indicating that they thought somebody that worked at their company full time was also working at our organization. Well, it turns out potentially as a consultant, and this was a person who was also on a visa. It turns out was a visa person who was a consultant. I mean, he's part of an organization that we, had retained, and there were only a few people there. There were a number of issues that came out of this, but one of which was talking to this person saying, so at first I watched, I saw like I had a desk. So I'm telling the person, they said, are you sure that he's there full time? I was like, well, I just walked by him working at his desk. So yeah, it was very awkward. And then I eventually called the guy in and he said, my company knows about it. I said, well, your company just reached out to ask if you were working. So I'm not sure about that. And the guy looked at me and said, I should leave now, shouldn't I? I said, probably a good idea. So then I had to explain to the people who had retained him within our company, within that company. The other unfortunate part was that the other company he was on, like I said, on a work visa, and they were trying to get him a green card. So for me, I also just didn't understand why somebody was risking so much, but then personal life. It was very sad to me, but what are you going to do? Because every one of us wanted to make sure that this couldn't actually be right.
So this is crazy to me. So as many of you know, I'm currently on a work visa, and a green card could be a possibility for me in the future. And it's to the point where I don't even go in, if there's a massage that looks interesting, and it's there was one I saw recently, like a CBD one, where I think they give you some kind of edible and they use CBD lotion on you. And I was like, I don't know if this could, maybe I could fail a drug test if I go through this spa treatment. So I just didn't even bother inquiring, booked something else. I can't understand someone risking so much.
It was mind-boggling.
Totally.
It was really unfortunate because you certainly think, about the person's family and others and some idea, but you think how can this happen? I don't know anything. I don't know anything after what I did. And I will say it's one of the times when I was doing HR compliance that nobody really had a complaint with me for how I handled it. Everyone was
I bet
unfortunate, but yeah, that was a weird story. So I'm not ruining Pilar's episode, but that was my one experience with a very in-your-face dual employment thing. But wow,
and great sign that the hotline is working.
Well, yeah, I mean, I talked to immediately reached out to the person that was there, and we were both kind of like, "Is this real?"
Yeah, amazing.
Anyway. All right. So I think, one of my next ones that I just have to mention is that for anyone who didn't know this already, I was really proud of you, Mary, for getting the award as a mentor of the year.
Thank you.
I put it on LinkedIn, but you are a great mentor, you're a colleague, you're a friend, and do that for many people and, in your own free time and things like that. And I'm really glad that was noticed and recognized and very well deserved.
Thank you for your kindness and sending the elevator back down to me with your words then, Lisa.
Well, thank you on that one. So what do you have any others there?
I do. And I just realized I have another cheeky GWICie to give out, which I distracted myself when I talked about the impromptu sports comment. So I'll go back to that later. But I've got one final Compliance Week highlight. And that was with regards to a leadership session. So what I found interesting this year about Compliance Week that I don't think I've traditionally seen before, and I've been attending their conference since 2018 now, is that unlike the SEC and the HCCA, Compliance Week hasn't traditionally gone with non-substantive compliance topics before. And this year they brought in a leadership expert. And my biggest takeaway from her session was, in order to function effectively, the brain needs oxygen. And if you're just sitting there all day, not getting up, doing things, you're not really helping yourself to be at your best from a work performance perspective. And I'm one of those people that just I will do marathon, just sitting there, bashing out work. And this was a really great reminder to me that I need to get up more. And some people will choose to maybe stretch or do some exercises. But for me, it may be as simple as the industrial sized laundry machines in our building, heading down to level 2 with, a big load of sheets or something instead of the own one, the small one in my own apartment, and doing some laundry for a bit, throwing it in and then coming up, just enough to get yourself moving. These small reminders, I think, are really helpful. And so I really appreciated them doing something a little differently. And I think it went down really well.
Yeah, I think that's true too. And from you talking about something done differently to a topic that may be very traditional in conferences, but one which I learned a lot about and something that, I've been thinking a lot about, and these are the new EU whistleblower requirements. And I really thought that panel was fantastic. And I mentioned Mary Hinton earlier, but some of her discussion about what the benefits of some of the different things in the directive and why they can help whistleblowers versus some of what I see as the challenges for organizations. I thought it was a really interesting conversation. It helped me understand it a little better. I still have my similar concerns as I have in the past, which is one of the challenges with people reporting in some of the countries in Europe, which is obviously where this is that people don't feel comfortable reporting to their local folks. And they don't believe that if you go to the whistleblower hotline, or however you're going to call it at your organization, helpline, is it really going to be separate, or will they be protected? So on the other hand, the idea of that we're protecting them by making sure they go somewhere local, is that good or is that bad? But also, just learning about it and thinking more, it helped me think a bit more open-mindedly to what the positives and negatives are, and to think about how to best handle it, for our company as we're figuring it out as well, just as many of the countries are.
Awesome. I think that'll be an ongoing discussion, and certainly one that's very interesting. The final GWICie that I have stems from another thing that Compliance Week, I think, did differently. They've traditionally, from at least the times that I've been attending, held some kind of women in compliance event. This year they held a women's brunch and learn. Gentlemen were invited to attend as well. It wasn't exclusive in that respect. And we had some wonderful allies as well as great women in compliance attending that session. And near the end, one lady had a question for the panel, and she said, you've talked about how transparency can really help us and in the fight for pay parity as women in compliance. But what if your situation is one where you are the only one who does your job? So I can't benchmark with other people in the company. I can't ask them to share their compensation packages with me and vice versa because I'm the only one. And so the response from this gets the best quote of Compliance Week award, GWICie, and that goes to Ellen Hunt, who responded with a smile, "I think unicorns should get paid more." So that was well received by the audience, to rapturous applause and many smiles all round. Lisa, what do you have to take us home?
Well, I think that even though we didn't talk about that earlier, I think it's a really great sentiment to end on, because most of you who are listening to this right now, you are unicorns. And in the most positive of ways. And being with us for 150 episodes, which I still kind of can't believe that we've done. When I take a step back and think about, the first day, which it's interesting, we end with Ellen because she was my first interview, the 11-minute interview with her. Now I've spoken to her and now have an annual an Ellen Hunt interview. So I was just going to say, but I think it's amazing where we've all come from here. And it's amazing to think about this journey that we did as a group, And I want to say thank you to all of you. And there are so many of us that are unicorns out there. So hopefully you are doing what you can, as we learned in the leadership, for your mental health as a unicorn, and you're being paid like one, and that you're, are enjoying what you're doing. So I want to say thank you to the listeners, to our guests, to you, Mary, and to obviously to Corporate Compliance Insights and the Compliance Podcast Network. And we're looking forward to 150 more. I guess this means next year will be 200. So start thinking about those GWICies now. So thanks so much. Thanks, Mary. And thanks to all.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.